Good morning, and welcome to the inaugural symposium on the deadly intersection of white supremacy and gun violence. My name is Janelle Covage, and I currently serve as the Strategic Partnerships and Equity Program Manager at the Johns Hopkins Center for Gun Violence Solutions, and will be one of the moderators of today's event, along with my colleagues Michelle Spencer and Josh Horwitz. Today would not be possible without the generous support of the Bloomberg American Health Initiative, Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, Department of Health Policy and Management, and the Morningstar Foundation. Today's symposium is being recorded, and the videos will be widely distributed once available. Don't miss out on our continued work in this area, as well as the other important work happening in the Center for Gun Violence Solutions. Follow us in the initiative on social media. We will also be sharing updates about the symposium on our social media channels using the hashtag GVP Symposium. If you have questions for our speakers and panelists throughout the day, we encourage you to submit them to cgvs@jhu.edu. After displays of white supremacist violence, we often hear that this is not who we are as a country, but it is who we are. Just last week, the FBI thwarted a planned attack on Baltimore's power grid by neo-Nazis. Last year, the mass shooting at a grocery store in Buffalo, New York, undergirded the many layers of white supremacy and how they converged to allow a white supremacist to murder and harm a predominantly Black community. White supremacy is what emboldens people to engage in vigilante violence and what makes a simple jog deadly for Black men like Ahmaud Arbery. Though today's symposium largely focuses on mass and political violence, I would be remiss to not name one of the most prevailing outcomes of the intersection of white supremacy and gun violence. Between 2020 and 2022, police in the U.S. have killed 3,427 people, and though we are only a month and 9 days into 2023, police have already killed several more. Tyree Nichols, Anthony Lowe Jr., Keenan Anderson, and the many others whose names are unknown to us. We are here today to discuss the pressing issue of hate-fueled ideologies and the devastating impact they can have on our communities and society as a whole. Some hear white supremacy and think it is an ideology created and left in the past, but it is as much a present threat as it was a historical one. White supremacy is woven in the very fabric of our nation and threaded through the institutions and ideologies our country was founded on and continues to operate from. The systems and permission structures upholding white supremacy are not broken. They are working as intended. When we confront this painful truth, we can work together to create meaningful solutions. This is not a new problem. Rather, it is a long-standing tradition for violence to be used to maintain white supremacy. But with increasing awareness of these violent incidents, we are in a position to take collective action to dismantle the institutions and permission structures that propagate white supremacy. It is crucial that we work together to find ways to address the root causes of these issues and to prevent them from occurring in the future. This symposium provides a platform for experts, community leaders, and concerned individuals to come together, share their research, perspectives, and experiences, and explore potential solutions. Let us use the symposium as an opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue, to listen and learn from one another, and to take concrete steps towards creating a better future, one free of white supremacy and gun violence. Thank you for joining us today. I'll now turn it over to Josh.
Thanks, Janelle. In 2009, I co-authored a book, Guns, Democracy, and the Insurrectionist Idea. In the book, we warned the nation about an emerging far-right interpretation of the Second Amendment, which held that people had the right to engage in armed political violence to fight what they individually perceived as tyranny. We warned that this ideology was an attempt by the white power movement to subvert democratic values like the right to vote and access to justice. We also warned that while the insurrectionist ideology was certainly toxic, it was the unfettered access to firearms that made it deadly. In 2009, the insurrectionist ideology was just starting to creep out of the dark corners of the internet as the far right expressed outrage about the tyranny of the Affordable Care Act, including the mere idea of government helping people obtain health insurance. President Trump later supercharged the move toward politically and racially motivated violence when in 2017 he failed to condemn the Unite the Right rally-goers in Charlottesville and went on to create a permission structure for white supremacists by embracing their leaders and echoing their rhetoric. Based on the work of the book and the subsequent history, I've argued that the permission structure built by Trump and other elected officials in his orbit have created the climate for armed racial violence to thrive. Just look at the evidence. In 2018, a white supremacist who frequently posted anti-Semitic material online shot and killed 11 worshipers and injured 6 more at the Tree of Life Synagogue in the Squirrel Hill neighborhood of Pittsburgh. He was apparently motivated on this particular Saturday by his hatred towards Jews and Jewish organizations that were assisting and supporting immigrants arriving in the United States. In August 2019, a shooter killed 22 people and injured 26 at a Walmart in El Paso, Texas, frequented by Mexican tourists from Juarez. The shooter drove 11 hours to get to this Walmart in a city that is 80% Latinx and posted an anti-immigrant screed on white supremacist website 20 minutes prior to the shooting. And of course, the insurrection at the Capitol brought all of these forces together in an effort to negate an election. We were compelled to organize this symposium and to search for solutions to armed white supremacism after a man who ranted about the great replacement on white supremacist message boards drove over 200 miles to kill black customers in a Tops supermarket in Buffalo, New York. And as Janelle made clear in her remarks, within the last couple of weeks, neo-Nazis attempted to destroy the power grid in Baltimore. All this violence has something in common. It is intended to intimidate people from exercising their democratic rights based on, among other things, their race, ethnicity, or religion. When we wrote the book, some downplayed its warnings and counseled that political violence in the second decade of the 21st century was a thing of the past. Well, in fact, just 10 years later, armed political violence is now so common that on Tuesday night in his State of the Union address, President Biden was compelled to address it. He said, and I quote, "We must all speak out. There is no place for political violence in America. In America, we must protect the right to vote, not suppress that fundamental right. We honor the results of our elections, not subvert the will of the people. We must uphold the rule of the law and restore trust in our institutions of democracy. And we must give hate and extremism in any form no safe harbor. We are not bystanders to history. We are not powerless before the forces that confront us. It is within our power of we the people. We are facing the test of our time, and the time for choosing is at hand." End quote. So today, my hope is that we seek not just to document the rise of white supremacism and political violence, but that we begin to identify the tools necessary to dismantle armed hate and break the permission structure that fuels it. Our lives and our democracy hang in the balance. And now I will hand the microphone to my colleague, Michelle Spencer.
Thank you, Josh. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. My name is Michelle Spencer. I am the Associate Director of the Bloomberg American Health Initiative and Deputy Director of Equity and Community Partnerships in the Center for Gun Violence Solutions here at the Bloomberg School of Public Health. It is my pleasure to join you along with my colleagues, Janelle Cubbage and Josh Horowitz. In May of 2022, I received the following. It was written by Andrea Crowdlick Swain, a licensed master's clinical social worker. She writes, "If your Black employees are quiet this week, let them be. If your Black employees are sick this week, let them be. If your Black employees are sad this week, let them be. If your Black employees are distracted this week, let them be. If your Black employees are restless this week, let them be. If your Black employees are exhausted this week, let them be. If your Black employees are distant this week, let them be. We've suffered another trauma this weekend. We've witnessed America's double standard again. We've seen yet another white man decide that we are hated so much that he traveled hours to shoot innocent Black people and then be taken into custody. We've prayed over our friends and families, asking God to make sure they come back home. We've wondered if the next time we choose to drive, run, go to the store, will it be our last outing? We've pondered why our existence is such a threat to society. We've questioned what is to come. We've wondered with doubt whether this will be acknowledged by our employers or if Monday morning will be filled with silence and a quiet expectation that we keep pushing on. So when your Black employees are quiet, sad, sick, distracted, exhausted, distant, or restless this week, remember that we are grieving and let us be. Too often we have had to still wonder these very same things. A run in Atlanta, reminiscent of the long history in the United States of white men hunting and lynching my ancestral fathers, uncles, brothers, sons, and nephews. A protest in Oregon, a trip to the store in Buffalo, the 2015 Charleston church shooting paralleled by the 1963 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, a rally in Charlottesville, a worship service at a synagogue in Pittsburgh. In 2021, the Southern Poverty Law Center tracked 733 hate groups across the United States, noting that hate groups have beliefs or practices that attack or malign an entire class of people. Every state in this country had at least one such hate group. Today, I enter this space with hope and with heaviness, aware of the political violence, of the impacts of misinformation, of guns, and the Supreme Court's expansive new interpretation of the Second Amendment. I enter this space acknowledging the histories of racism, structural oppression, and the disavowal of civil rights and liberties to African Americans. I enter this space aware of political violence, police violence, gun violence, extremism, flawed justice and educational systems, microaggressive behaviors and attitudes, biases, and rights that are only equal for some. The climate of today endangers the strength of our diverse humanity. Yet, I enter this space with colleagues, practitioners, community members, researchers, elected officials who are all determined to use policy, advocacy, research, and practice tools to address the intersection of white supremacy and firearms that threatens our democracy. I'm yet mindfully cautious, as Audre Lorde noted in her 1984 essay, that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. Today, I enter this space as a Black Afro-Caribbean American woman, hopeful in our bipartisan efforts to address extremist actions that lead to instability and deaths and discourages the full engagement of our First Amendment, my First Amendment rights, and further divides and erodes our public trust. Today, I enter this space with you to explore and to reimagine the possibilities of an inclusive and united states. In this moment, hearing all of our remarks, I'm going to turn to Josh, who noted in his remarks that he has been in this space for more than 30 years. And I do wonder, Josh, having been in this space for so long, do you have professional or personal experiences that really inform your thinking about the intersections of guns and violence in this country?
Well, I do, and thank you for those very powerful remarks to both of you. That's a great way to start this symposium. I appreciate being up here with both of you. In 1999, I learned about a shooting at the Jewish Community Center, the North Valley Jewish Community Center in Los Angeles, and of course, my heart went out to those families. And there was also a Filipino American postman who was killed in that same incident. So there were campers who were shot and a postman who was killed. We later learned that there was a white supremacist, who I'm not going to name, who had bought guns and drove it, again, driven all through from Washington, Oregon to California to do this shooting. And it was horrifying to the nation. We all saw it in the news. But then I got that call from those families and said, can you help me? Can you help us? Can you help us get justice for our children and for our loved ones who are no longer with us? And it brought it really home for me, because I thought about my own days in my own synagogue and what those people must have gone through, and the families who lost a loved one. And, at that time, it was a while ago, it was over 20 years ago, and we didn't really practice law at our fund at the time, but I jumped in and I said, I'm going to help organize a legal team. Yeah. And we did that, and we represented those families, and that litigation went on for 14 years. And I'm very grateful for all the families that have let me in. But here's what I learned. Those folks were targeted because of their religion and their ethnicity. That's number one. And the shooter drove a long way to do that. He was an avowed white supremacist who should never have had a firearm. What I learned in that litigation is about the market of how guns are marketed to white supremacists, and how policy, right, intersects with those things. So how easy it was for someone to buy all those firearms, including an Uzi style rifle, really, at a gun show without a background check, even though the person was prohibited, and then take them across state lines. And you think about what are the kinds of interventions that you could have done. And so when we think about the ideology that we're confronting, and we have to, and as Joe Biden said, we can't give any safe harbor to hate. We also need to think about how that intersects with the policy, and those things need to come together. So that's the way personally that I've been informed by that, and I carry that close to my heart, because that's working with these families and seeing their pain and seeing all the trauma that goes with this for years, right? It's not just one incident. It's not just physical. It's an incredible experience, and shaped my thinking, both about why I'm so passionate, why I wrote the book, why I really care about this symposium today, but also why I really care about the policy that arms armed hate, right? We need to disarm hate. We can't keep on arming it, making it easy.
Yeah, I appreciate your mention of the policy levers. And I know that you have been not just in this space working on this with families and communities, but certainly thinking about the advocacy pillars as well and the opportunities there. Janelle, I want to turn to you. You mentioned in your opening remarks the foil power grid attack on Baltimore. And so I would love to hear some of your initial impressions on that.
Thanks, Michelle. Yeah, my first initial impression is that it's worrisome, and it's a very sobering reminder of how ever present this threat is to our country at all times. It's interesting to look at the coverage of the foiled plot on Baltimore's power grid from a gender perspective, because we see that the males involved are referred to as neo-Nazi leaders, whereas Sarah Clendaniel, the girlfriend of one of the involved individuals, is referred to as the girlfriend, Maryland woman. And referring to her as such really erases her very active role in the plot of this plan. And it's something that we see time and time again, that we focus, and for good reason, on men and their role in white supremacy and propagating white supremacist violence. But we really do a disservice when we do not focus on the role that women play in white supremacy, because they're supporting the men who are propagating this violence and this hateful ideology. And they're also taking active roles in this ideology and violence themselves. So if we're going to come up with meaningful solutions, we have to address both men and women who are participating in white supremacy and this violence.
I appreciate your naming gender as certainly an avenue for us to look. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of naming race, like calling out racism in these instances, and for both of you, right? Like, it's not just saying white supremacist, but it's also naming racism as like the thing that is eating and the thing that is really disrupting our sense of safety and threatening our democracy.
Yeah, race is also an important aspect to look at. I mean, race was developed to uphold white supremacy and create this false classification system that places differential value on people based on the color of their skin and where they come from. And we see that in interpersonal interactions, but we also see that structurally, right? This is the intentional disinvestment of communities, denial of opportunity, of resources. And it's important that we point out racism. It's so insidious in our country, and so woven into the fabric of our country that we miss it often because we're just used to it. So it's really important to name that. And especially with this recent incident with Tyre Nichols in Memphis, there's been a lot of discourse around how is this about race when the officers were Black? And I think it's a good reminder and maybe a good lesson for people who might be new to this journey and understanding white supremacy, that the actor's race does not matter. Anybody of any race or any gender can uphold white supremacy because it's an institution, it's structural, it's not just interpersonal.
And I would just add the erasure of history with what's going on in limiting African American studies courses in Florida. And we're trying to literally erase that history. I mean, we have to name that, which it is. It's racism. We need to say that. Michelle, you've been asking questions. Let me turn it towards you. We're here at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Health. What are we doing here at the school to address that racism, to address these issues that we're talking about today?
Yeah. Well, and Hopkins has been very clear that our dean in recent years have developed the roadmap for IDEA, inclusion, diversity, anti-racism, and equity. She has named an office, a vice dean for that, an associate dean for that. We across the school and across the academy are very clear in the way that we are approaching our admissions, the way we are approaching our curricula, the way we are creating seminars to talk about these issues. You know, it's really great to see and to be in spaces where we can name racism, where we're not afraid to say the words, where we are thinking about how we are teaching in our courses, how we are infusing and ensuring that the practices of IDEA are reflected in terms of those principles. Just recently, we were working and continue to work with the School of Medicine in developing a symposium and a series on how medicine and public health really informs racism and moves that. And so I think we are looking at ourselves and examining what it is that we should be doing differently and could be doing differently. Certainly, you both are part of the Department of Health Policy and Management.
Right.
And, you know, our chair is very committed to this work. And so we do not do anything within our department without thinking about how it impacts and how inclusion, diversity, equity are reflected in our hiring processes, in our personnel actions, as well as in our curricular. And so it's not just in HPM, but it's across the university and certainly across our school. And I'm appreciative of that. It wasn't just in the last 1 or 2 years, but certainly I think all of the racial justice and social justice movements in the last several years has really propelled us to this moment and to this point. I think even now, being in this space, talking and naming these issues speaks to how far we're coming and how far we've come.
Great. And you've been personally involved with that effort.
I am. I sit. I am the associate chair for inclusion, diversity, anti-racism, and equity in our department. And so I'm intimately involved in thinking about and working with our chair and the leadership in thinking about what the department can do and what are the tools and human resources as well as the financial needs to really move this work forward. We are not a department that is talking about this work. We are very action focused and thinking about the impacts. And when we do that, we know that we are not just thinking about the faculty, we're not just thinking about our team and staff members, but we're thinking about our students, those who we are educating, who are becoming future public health leaders. And when they do this work and when they're out in the world doing this work, they need to be thinking about this work in terms of how it's impacting everyone from racial, gender, ethnic, cultural, all lens of diversity.
Thank you for giving that, and it's great. I really am appreciative of being in an environment where all that is happening.
Yeah. So am I. Let me say, so am I. I think very much about scholars and the work that is happening across other institutions. And I know that Hopkins is an institution where many look and mirror. And so I appreciate being in a space where we can openly have dialogues about what is happening across the country. One of the things I wanted to ask you about are the protections, right? So the Supreme Court, and I know that we're going to be talking about many of this as we go
Yeah.
along throughout the day, but the Supreme Court's decision. Talk a little bit about that.
Well, a decade ago, we had the Heller decision, which was the first case to have an individual right to keep and bear arms, right? So in the home. And then this latest case last spring, early summer, was the Bruin case. And that extended the right to have a gun outside of the home and struck down some of New York's laws. Yeah. So we went back and forth about what New York can do after that. But in that discussion, what the court sort of put out there was a new historical test. And it said that, is there something that's analogous in the history around the time of the framing? Mm-hmm. So laws will be upheld if there's something historically analogous. Yeah. Well, let's think about what was historically analogous at the time of the framing, right? The Constitution was framed by men, white men. Women did not have the right to contract or to vote or to own property. Slavery was legal at the time, embedded in our Constitution. Mm-hmm. If that's the standard that we have to go back to, mm-hmm. What laws would be, many laws will be overturned, and the protections that we come to rely on will be gone. And so the Fifth Circuit recently struck down, this is incredible, struck down the domestic violence protection. So when you have a protective order now, it is federal law that an abuser cannot have a firearm during the pendency of that order. That's basic safety, mm-hmm. Yeah. Right? The Fifth Circuit just struck that provision down. So now women in Louisiana and Texas, right, their abusers can arm themselves. And we can't find a historical analogous. Do we need a historical analogy to say that's horrible, that we can't protect our own citizens, right? So that's the risk. Now, there's going to be court cases all over the place. But as we enter this space, we have to realize that we are in a new era of Supreme Court jurisprudence. And we are definitely at the center engaged in pushing back on that. And we definitely need to, because what's going on at the lower courts right now can be disastrous. Mm. Again, decisions all over the place. Yeah. But we've got a lot to do in that front.
Yeah. Which is both a challenge and disheartening to think that this can go in many different ways.
It is. And the fact is, like, the court right now is not particularly interested in public health data. We need to open that door. That's what at our center, we believe in this data, because think about the data about disarming abusers is very clear. Yeah. We need to get, history is one thing, but our data shows that this will save lives. And that's what we do here. Yeah. And so it's very, we have to keep a close eye on that.
Absolutely. So Janelle, I know that you are about to go into a discussion shortly with the Reverend Rasher. What are you hoping that this day will hold?
I'm just looking forward to the sharing of lived experience of people who have personally been impacted by this issue, how they've gotten through, and hoping to gain some insights from that, as well as looking forward to talking about and discussing potential solutions so that, we can take action to end this horrible issue plaguing our country.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Josh. Thank you, Janelle.